Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cracking open a biological dossier that is, quite frankly, fascinating. And, okay, maybe a little bit skin crawling. We're unpacking a masterclass in parasitic survival from a family of creatures that honestly feel more like science fiction than reality. We're going to break down exactly how they function, how they spread, and ultimately, how humanity fights back. But before we get into the heavy science, let me ask you a quick trivia question to set the stage. What kind of creature can grow to a staggering 20 meters long, possesses absolutely no mouth, and makes its permanent home right inside your digestive tract?
The answer is Cestodes, or as they're far more commonly known to us, tapeworms. Okay, let's dive into this bizarre and incredibly successful class of parasites. They are a true marvel of evolutionary specialization. I mean, they've stripped away almost everything we consider normal for an animal, all just to become the perfect hidden passenger. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet the tapeworms. Second, anatomy of a parasite. Third, the Taenia trio. Fourth, the tapeworm life cycle. Fifth, disease and diagnosis. And sixth, prevention and control.
Section 1. Meet the tapeworms, biological villains. Tapeworms have some truly alien-like traits. First off, they have these ribbon-like bodies that can reach up to 20 meters. Just imagine that for a second. 20 meters. Even wilder, they're completely hermaphroditic and capable of self-fertilizing. That means a single worm can initiate an entirely new life cycle all on its own. And remember our trivia question? It's entirely true. They have no mouth, no digestive tract, and no internal excretory organs. Instead, they absorb all their necessary nutrients directly through their outer skin, which is called the tegument. They quite literally bathe in the food you've already digested and just soak it right up. Section 2. Anatomy of a parasite, form and function. So, if a creature doesn't have a mouth, how does it actually manage to attach to you and grow to such massive proportions without just, being flushed out of your system? Well, their anatomical structure gives us the answer, and this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they pull this off. At the very top is the scolex, that's the head region. It acts as a super powerful anchoring organ, equipped with suckers or hooks. Just below that is the narrow neck zone. Now, the neck is essentially an active growth factory, constantly churning out new segments. And the rest of the massive body is the strabilla, which is a long, continuous chain of individual segments called proglottids. You can see here how those proglottids develop dynamically as they're pushed further down the chain. Near the neck, they start out as immature segments, but as they move down, they become mature, hermaphroditic units containing fully functioning male and female reproductive organs. Finally, at the very tail end of the tapeworm, they become what we call gravid proglottids. Now, a gravid proglottid is essentially just a massive sac packed with tens of thousands of eggs, just waiting to detach and spread out into the environment. Section 3. The Taenia trio, Saginata and Solium. There are 3 primary Taenia species we track in clinical parasitology. First up is Taenia saginata, the beef tapeworm. It's the absolute giant of the group, easily reaching up to 10 meters, but it is unarmed, which means it has no hooks. Then we have Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm. It's shorter, capping out around 2 to 4 meters, but it is way more dangerous because it's armed with a nasty double crown of hooks. Finally, there's Taenia asiatica, the Asian tapeworm. This one grows between 4 and 8 meters and has a prominent rostellum with vestigial hooklets, and it's primarily linked to pig livers. In the lab, we actually often differentiate these guys by counting the lateral uterine branches inside those gravid proglottids we just talked about. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how visually anchoring this terminology brings it to life. Look closely at the scolex of Taenia solium on the far left. You can clearly see that fleshy, cushion-like rostellum at the top, crowned with those menacing hooks. Now compare that to Taenia saginata in the middle, which only has the 4 smooth suckers. Seeing them side by side really highlights the structural differences between the armed pork tapeworm and the unarmed beef variant.
Section 4. The tapeworm life cycle, a journey to the host.
Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do these complex, segmented parasites make their way into the human body in the first place? To answer that, let's map out the parasite's journey. This CDC pathway clearly outlines the necessary leap from environmental contamination into intermediate hosts like pigs and cattle, and finally into the definitive host, which unfortunately for us is humans. Let's break that visual map down into 4 easy-to-digest sequential steps. Step 1. Intermediate hosts, like cattle or pigs, ingest vegetation that's been contaminated with tapeworm eggs. Step 2. Inside the animal, the eggs hatch into oncospheres, penetrate the intestinal wall, and develop into cysts called cystocerci, right inside the animal's muscle tissue. Step 3. Humans come along and ingest that raw or undercooked infected meat. And finally, step 4, once inside our stomach, the cyst breaks open, the scolex attaches to the wall of our small intestine, and the adult worm begins to grow, starting the whole crazy cycle anew. Section 5. Disease and Diagnosis. Clinical Realities. When it comes to clinical manifestations, we really have to recognize a massive split in severity. Standard intestinal infections, meaning just having the adult worm inside you, are generally mild. The worm just kind of hangs out and steals your nutrients. However, a massive danger arises specifically with Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm, if humans accidentally ingest the eggs directly from feces rather than the cysts in meat. If this happens, humans accidentally become the intermediate host. The larvae migrate into our own tissues, causing a disease called cysticercosis. If those cysts form in the brain, it triggers neurocysticercosis, which can lead to violent convulsions and abnormal spinal fluid. If they migrate to the eyes, it causes ocular cysticercosis and potential vision loss. It is incredibly serious. Because the stakes are just so high, lab diagnosis is absolutely critical. Usually, this involves the microscopic identification of the eggs in stool samples. Notice the incredibly thick, radiated shell of the egg here. And if you peer closely into the center, you can actually see the tiny hooklets of this 6-hooked embryo just waiting for a host. Now, one really tricky thing for diagnosticians is that the microscopic eggs of all these Taenia species look practically identical, so further testing of the proglottids or the scolex itself is often needed to figure out exactly which one we're dealing with. Section 6. Prevention and Control. Breaking the cycle. The epidemiological risk factors essentially provide us with a giant what not to do list. On an individual level, the primary driver is the consumption of raw or undercooked infected meat. But on a broader, environmental scale, it's driven by poor global sanitation and risky agricultural practices, specifically allowing free-roaming pigs and cattle to scavenge in areas contaminated with human waste. For instance, in parts of the Philippines and Asia, Taenia asiatica maintains a foothold precisely due to a mix of these free-roaming livestock practices and local culinary traditions that involve undercooked meat. So the crucial point is the contrast between the problem and the solution. On one hand, the clinical disease impacts can be utterly devastating. We're talking brain lesions, seizures, and blindness. But on the other side of the ledger, the practical prevention strategies are incredibly straightforward. We don't need highly advanced medical technology to stop these parasites in their tracks. We just need to implement proper penning of animals, maintain clean water and sanitation to manage human waste, and adhere to basic food safety standards. Which brings us to the core takeaway of this entire dossier. Despite their millions of years of terrifying evolution, the ultimate defense against becoming the next home for a 20-meter mouthless parasite is completely in your hands. It really just comes down to this. Are you cooking your meat properly? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I hope you keep that question in the back of your mind the next time you sit down for dinner.